Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Check the date here. This is our formation day for April 17th, 2021. In case anybody looks at this a century from now. So, anyway, good to have you with us.
You'll be cut off.
Yeah, we'll all be cut out. Yeah, so hi there, whoever's left. Anyway. So today we are going to cover the admissions and the formation of members, and I think this is pretty familiar to all of you, most of you anyway. And then also, because we have some questions on that, but we're going to have a little bit more time, one of the things that I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about kind of the direction that I'm kind of leaning for the retreat in June, okay? And some topics, and then kind of hear from you to see, where you would like to go with that, okay? So let's begin with our prayer to Saint Joseph. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Blessed Joseph, husband of Mary, be with us this day. You protected and cherished the Virgin, loving the child Jesus as your Son. You rescued him from danger of death. Defend the church, the household of God, purchased by the blood of Christ. Guardian of the Holy Family, be with us in our trials. May your prayers obtain for us the strength to flee from error and wrestle with the powers of corruption, so that in life we may grow in holiness, and in death rejoice in the crown of victory. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, I'm using the Holy Family book because most of you, that's the one that you're using here. Make sure that we're on the right page in 65. Right? Okay. Let me give you a little background in history to when we first started the Institute of St. Joseph, because that's kind of what we're doing, going back to the principles and foundations. And so those of you who have been with us for a long time, like Randy and Nancy particularly, who go back to the very beginning, will remember that back in the 80s, early 90s, things were different in many respects. One is that we had perhaps a more what I want to say, I have to be careful about what I pass on in the next 100 years. But this was the beginning of the pontificate of Pope John Paul II, okay? And so there were two things that were happening. One, of course, was a society that was kind of up in arms and all of that, even a church that had struggled after the Second Vatican Council to really absorb and understand what the council actually taught, and there was all kinds of things that were happening within the church. And catechetics at the time, it's not that it's necessarily become huge in terms of its strength today, but it was quite different. We refer back to the balloons and the butterflies and the balloon. Jesus loves you, this I know, for the Bible tells you so, kind of thing. Okay, there wasn't a lot of content of faith being passed on. Okay, so as our older members know, that the eligibility and the admission and the formation of people coming into the Institute who were drawn for the Institute were not only people who had a solid life of faith that they were living, Catholic faith, and then they wanted to go deeper and to consecrate that life in a much different way, which I will say those who remained, this is what happened, okay? But there also were what I might call very angry Catholics, meaning that they were sick and tired, so to speak, of the confusion. And a good number of them were looking for a group that would just simply meet and talk about how bad the world is and how bad the church is. Okay? You remember that. Okay? And it was always very tense to, and Peggy too, will remember some of that. She was kind of immersed in it because she had maybe a husband who was very involved with a lot of that. Not as the, but anyway, he's got battle scars. Let me put it that way too. And a lot of us did. And so I will say that our mark of orthodoxy was a strike against us in many respects. I mean, there was the Institute of St. Joseph did not come out from, oh boy, look at this nice new group, you know. But rather, it was our intention to root ourselves deeply in the faith of the church, as the faith of the church is given to us in what was true. So there was a battle on both sides between those who left because we were too conservative orthodox, and then there was another group where we weren't conservative and orthodox enough. Okay, so that was a strike to me, and remember, good whatever stage he was at, whether he was Father Burke or Bishop Burke or Cardinal Burke, whichever, through that whole page of remaining consistent, remaining constant, to teach what the church teaches, what it really teaches, and to practice what the church calls us to practice. And so as we've come now, we aren't even bothered by people who want to dismiss the church. You know, they're just kind of not in church anymore. They're not even yelling, they're just out. And in terms of those who are ultra conservative kind of thing, so to speak, that has really been tempered throughout the pontificate of Pope John Paul II. He did a magnificent job in his of basically reteaching everything, you know, not new teaching, but really explaining the depth of the Second Vatican Council, whether it had to do with the world or had to do with the church, whether it had to do with family life, everything. You know, catechetics, he gave us the new catechism, which was a marvelous thing, because when we first started, one of the things we needed to do was to actually have very strong catechetical formation. Going through a catechism, and we would grab what we thought to be good catechisms that people wrote to be able to teach, because there was not the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It was not present yet. Once that was established, well, then that was it. So now people coming in or interested oftentimes have come from, by the way, that was the beginning of a cable network called EWTN, which was nearly kicked off the airs too. They survived, and all their struggles. But there's so much out there now in terms of whether it's on cable, internet, or whatever it is, and blogs, and you know, you get them all, I'm sure. I mean, you're led to them, of this whole discussion. So people are just far more informed about the teachings of the church and all of that. So it's really not, that has not been a principal kind of thing for us, so much as taking what, and it may be some explanation of things that needed to take place, but people come in essentially basically formed. So now it's a matter then of being able to continue that formation in the world in which we live, okay? So I just wanted to give you a little historical context. That formation is not just, okay, you know, we've had this formation manual for all these years and this is what we must do. That formation has always tried to match, if you will, kind of where we're at in the institute, in our own society. Okay. So anyway, admission and formation of the members, and this is, if you notice, this is basically comes from canon law. Okay, These are the things required for anyone entering an association of the faithful, or that which is directed toward consecrated life. 1, eligibility. Any baptized Catholic may be admitted into the Institute of St. Joseph who is moved by the right intention, possesses the qualities required by common proper law, and is without impediment. Okay? So, what does that mean? The qualities required by common proper law. Because of our own institute, which has 4 different expressions of it in the different states of life, it applies differently. So, for example, that we must be, as priests, diocesan priest of the Diocese of La Crosse, in good standing, and all of that. For a single person living in the world, a similar kind of thing. They need to be baptized, confirmed, with all of us, through confirmation, so all the sacraments of initiation completed, and then the willingness on the part of the single person who wants to remain single to also know that eventually there is a vow of chastity, or chastity, or celibacy, if as we would call it in terms of a male. If you're a married person, you need to be in a
Sacramental marriage.
what's that?
Sacramental marriage.
A sacramental marriage with all of its, in other words, in terms of, even if there is a person who has been divorced, an annulment must be granted beforehand, so that the church, in other words, those things, give them open to that. Be living in a situation where, if you're living in a sacramental marriage, you're living in a proper sacramental marriage, and not with someone, all those kinds of things. And then, of course, as a member of the community, then that actually has, I won't go through all of that, but because of living as a community and now as hermits, obviously that there's, as I expressed to you before, there's, when we went through the norms of consecrated life, all of those things that apply. So that's what I'm saying, is that it's going to be a little different for everyone in terms of that, but those things need to be present. So that's why you fill out the application form, and we need to know, receive documents. So we need to have a baptismal certificate, and your date of first communion and confirmation, and your marriage date if you're married, and all of those kinds of things. So the church requires all of that. So without impediment means that any one of those things are not present, and so then you're not able to enter. Okay? So you can always, if you got a code of canon law handy, you can just look up those numbers, okay? It'll refer to that. Okay, 1 is invalidly admitted who has not completed his or her 17th year of age. Oh, and how old are you? No, I'm just kidding. You're over 17, I know. Yeah. Yeah, right. Okay. Presently obligated by a sacred bond in an institute of consecrated life, meaning that if you're already involved in an institute of consecrated life, you can't join another one. Okay? You can't be in 2. Or incorporated into a society of apostolic life. Those are, again, technical things. Admitted under force, grave fear, or fraud, has concealed incorporation into an institute of consecrated life or a society of apostolic life. Okay? So the Moderator General admits a person as an observer after review and the consultation of the full council. So what we do is, the first thing, as I said, when you make your application, is to make sure that all of the proper documentation and all of that is certain. So that's why we do that. Okay. And then observership. So the observership period is established as a means of introducing prospective members to the life of the Institute of St. Joseph. So the one thing I want you to look at is there's two aspects of this. One who is admitted as an observer after the consultation with a full council, but there also is this period of time. So it's, in other words, it's not a what do we call, it's not like the council meets and votes on observership, okay? Very simply, and part of the thing is that we are so small and oftentimes known and introduced by other people, you know, that it's really a matter of anyone present who might be able to bring something forward to us, that and that's kind of the way we've looked at it. Because remember, go back to the first part, any baptized Catholic may be admitted to the Institute of St. Joseph. So as you read canon law, you read it toward the favor of the person, not against the person. Okay, sit down and put a bulb in a room and interrogate a person before, you know, that's not the way to bring people into the Institute of St. Joseph. Okay. So it's a matter of if there, you know, is knowledge of something where there might be that has not been brought forward, if there's a concern about a member or whatever, that's brought forward, okay? And then we would meet as a, you know, council to discuss any of this if there's a necessity. Right now, we, you know, there might have been ages past where, you know, we would have had to kind of discuss that, but for the most part, that has not been an issue. Okay, so introducing the prospective member to the life of the Institute of St. Joseph. The prospective member, after having inquired about the Institute of St. Joseph, must submit a personal letter to the Moderator General requesting admittance. So that's why we ask that you write a letter. The very simple thing is that we haven't cajoled you to become a member. You have freely asked. So we have a letter there saying, oh no, you asked. Okay, you're the one who, you know, this was all freely. Obtain a complete, return the application entrance, submit a recent baptismal certificate within 4 months with updated records of all sacramental information. I'll tell you a little interesting thing. The diocese must be preparing for my death. Because our, I think he's just updating it, but some of you might remember Father Kurt Affelbeck. He is works in the Chancery office. And he has written to priests making sure that, you know, when a priest dies, they have a proper obituary with all the information. So anyway, we're supposed to fill out this form and I think get a baptismal certificate for, you know, like everybody else does, like if you're going to get married or whatever it is, but it should contain all the sacramental records. And so I informed Father Kazuski, who, as you know, is leaving us now, but he's been the pastor of my home parish for a while, that when I got the baptismal certificate from the secretary, neither my diaconate ordination nor my priesthood ordination was recorded. So like, well, okay. So that kind of prompted maybe things not being quite recorded right in the parish, to make sure that, hey, you know, priests, maybe you ought to check to see if your ordination has been recorded on your baptismal certificate. But anyway, so that's how we know that all when we're preparing couples for marriage, and we get a baptismal certificate to find out that it's not necessarily that they weren't confirmed, but somebody forgot to write it in. Okay, so anyway. That's just a little sign. Present any other necessary documents removing impediments for membership. So that would be, we call a rescript. So if somebody has been divorced and an annulment has been granted, we need a copy of that granting of the annulment so that we know that that's happened. So we have to go through all of that. Okay, after the documents have been reviewed and approved, the prospective member is then received as an observer the first meeting of the formation year. That we've kind of, that was when we were a little bit more orderly. I mean, what I mean by that is that we, observership is kind of like come and see. And so, just like in a lot of things, sometimes come and see doesn't correspond with September. You know what I mean? So we've kind of loosened that up to be able to say that we want people to just come and see. They're not necessarily technically in observership, but that's why we have that consecration to St. Joseph, which in effect is kind of like the very beginning of, that's official, okay? Now I know why Father Kazuski never made his observership. I mean, his consecration to St. Joseph, okay? Meaning was, he'd hardly ever be able to get at a meeting now because he's going to be in Milwaukee. So anyway, but he's been a good member of our priest fraternity, as we call associates, that are there, which we've changed that a little bit too, so we can invite priests. As you probably noticed last month, the number of younger priests who were present here, that's a result of kind of opening things up and forming a fraternity among priests, which we're supposed to do. Whether that's official or not, to the whole of the Institute, it is an association that we as the priest fraternity have established to be able to gather together with priests. So you can see some of this is a little fluid. The observership period is no less than 6 months and includes regular attendance at formation meetings, introduction to the spiritual discipline of the Institute, introduction to the Liturgy of the Hours, and a basic review of the Catholic faith. Okay? That's essentially it. And if there are those who are not familiar with the Liturgy of the Hours, again, previously, I think Julie and Ted have helped with that, of working with individuals to help them, get accustomed to it. But I know, being the director of deacon formation, you ought to see a lot of them don't know how to pray the Liturgy of the Hours, and the first year of aspirancy is like disaster. Because you got all the guys who know what they're doing, and then the other guys are like, what page are we on? So, but after 2 years of aspirancy, they're right with it. So it just takes practice, part of it. Okay, so that's very simple. In candidacy then, the candidacy period is a time when all probationary members, irrespective of their state in life, are formed in the spirit and the manner of life of the Institute of St. Joseph and the respective fraternities. So the candidacy period is no less than 2 full consecutive years, including the observership period. So it does include the observership period, okay? After 1 full year of successful formation, candidates make a private consecration to St. Joseph, trusting in his help and protection. This marks the time when candidates are admitted into individual fraternity meetings, should be, according to one's intended state in life. This also is the time when eligible candidates to the monastic life, or hermit life as it now, enter their respective community as apostolate. Candidates who are uncertain about their state in life may use this time for vocational discernment. It is important that younger persons see the beauty of the various Christian states of life to help them come to a personal decision. And so this is something really important, just in terms of the membership. We've got I don't think I'm sharing anything out of well, I won't say a name, but anyway, we have some members who, for example, might feel called to the married life, right? So, but hasn't found the right married life person. You know what I mean? So in other words, it's not as easy as one thinks, right? That, you could be called to the married life, but it doesn't mean you found the person you're going to have a married life with, okay? So part of the incorporation of the Institute, because it is so important for us to understand in the very heart and depth of what it means to be diocesan priest, what it means to be a married person, what it means to be a single person living in the world, and what it means to be a hermit now. And to embrace all of that and not try to live somebody else's life, okay? That clarity, the church gives us a clarity about that, and this becomes the very heart and soul of how we live our consecrated life out, okay? That is so very important. So if somebody is in flux, okay, we don't want to obligate them to a fraternity that, just because they're single doesn't mean that they want to remain single, okay? And that's the principal one of being able to say, no, you can continue to live within the whole of the Institute of St. Joseph, but can't officially join a fraternity. Excuse me, you can't officially join a fraternity until you've got that resolution of the state in life figured out. Okay, does that make sense? So that's what that means. Okay. So the candidacy, then the novitiate, following 2 successful years of candidacy, the member enters a 2-year novitiate. This is marked by a private consecration to the Blessed Mother. The focus of this period is deepening the Marian consent to the will of God. But to give this consent, the member must be ready to follow a particular state in life. Okay, so that's a key thing that because of the Marian consecration, it's not just kind of a devotional thing, but if you're going to give yourself completely to do the will of God, you've got to be able to give it your all. And if you're still in flux in terms of your state in life, that's hard to do. So again, one lives in that consecration to St. Joseph, always in preparation for wherever God will call that person. And it's not just single to married. It can also be a single, it can be a single person who might be called to the eremitical life. Or for a young man, it could be to the priesthood. I'm thinking right now, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 young men, well, they're middle-aged young men, who started with us, and this was kind of their introduction, who became priests. Okay, one in a religious order, and 3 of them who are priests of the Diocese of La Crosse. Okay? But their initial part, now they didn't. Those 3 did not remain as members of the Institute of St. Joseph. Okay, but their beginning, hearing their call. Remember one pastor who knew a couple of them was very, and these were during a little bit more of the rough times, but was very admired very much what must be going on within the Institute of St. Joseph because of these priests being able to, these young men hearing this call to the priesthood, and eventually embracing that. So that all can change. So to give the consent, the member must be follow a particular state life. Candidate may not take this step until a firm vocational choice is made. In the monastic or hermit community, the member receives the habit of the novice and of the religious name. Temporary profession. So this is kind of corresponding. This was a tough thing to do, in that when you've got religious life along with secular consecration, basically that's the 2. Remember I explained we have in the Code of Canon Law, there's religious institutes and secular institutes. We have a bridge between both. So we had to correspond our admission in all of these, steps with the requirement of both the secular institute plus the religious institutes. So that's why we make that distinction. Okay, excuse me. Temporary profession. After no less than 4 full consecutive years of formation, members are capable of making their first profession of vows or promises to observe the 3 evangelical counsels of poverty, of chastity, and of obedience. Okay. Excuse me. What did I do with my coffee? I guess I left it back there. And that's of course the heart of consecrated life, is the vows or the promises of poverty, of chastity, and of obedience. But as the Code of Canon Law, requires, that is done. Is that it? Huh? Thank you. Yep. Okay. So that takes a while. So to be able to really make those vows of poverty, of chastity, and of obedience, and of course, as our married members know, that the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience are only allowed to make vows for someone who is also going to vow celibacy. Okay? Chastity and celibacy are the same if it's a vow. Other promises can be made in chastity that are not celibacy according to the Constitution, which means how it is lived out in the Constitution. And I think I've mentioned that before, that when remember I talked about in the Code of Canon Law that there was this one code talking about new forms of consecrated life, which nobody, even the best canonists, cannot figure out how that ever got there and what it means. I believe in my own heart, and there's confirmation from some who have written about this, that means the ability for a married couple to make vows of chastity, vows, according to their state in life. In other words, as a married person. And the reason I say that is because after having seen the life of the Institute of St. Joseph, and obviously of the married persons, the seriousness of living out what the church talks about as what true married life is, and chastity meaning the kind of chastity that Pope John Paul II so beautifully explained in terms of the theology of the body, that it doesn't just mean celibacy, but chastity means a very rich understanding of that life, the component of life and love, the theology of the body as Pope John Paul II expressed it. This is at the heart of what some who have written about this say is a possibility if we really take seriously what that means, what chastity really means, even in the married life, what it means in the married life. Yeah.
Very vague.
What's that?
You're being vague. Can you explain a little more? I'm not getting any of this difference between chastity and celibacy and how it relates to marriage on law.
Okay, well, celibacy just simply means you may not have sexual intercourse with anybody. Okay? Chastity doesn't mean that, right? Chastity means that you are going to have a chaste relationship. A married couple can have a chaste marital relationship. There's a lot of them that don't, right? Just look at the world in which we live. And so that's what I'm saying is, and I think, okay, in some respects, what I see is that even celibacy is less of a sign as it used to be, because people associate that with, just remaining single. How many couples remain single? meaning they've never been officially married. So that understanding of never getting married, and what celibacy means, that means one thing. But for a couple to get married and to live a chaste relationship both before and during the marriage, as is proper to marriage, that to me is almost the more radical sign today. The more radical sign. The importance of the sacrament of marriage. Taking that seriously. And living it according. Does that help?
Nope.
Nope.
I mean, in terms of being a married person, how would my marriage be chaste as opposed to my marriage being unchaste?
Well, contraception. Right? Okay? So what we're talking about there is what the church teaches in a sacramental marriage. The dignity of the human person, and how one treats each other in a married or sexual relationship. Okay, and so the issue of contraception and the like, a sterility of sexual expression, which would be unchaste. See, so I don't know. Can you think of other?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of other. Well, I'm thinking of, how we're immersed like in pornography.
Yeah.
And how a couple would be able to go, oh well, let's go to the bookstore and get some stuff to spice up stuff.
Right.
That would
Exactly.
that'd be totally a living in the world kind of way
Right.
that is so. I don't know. I'm sure people just think that that's a normal thing to do.
Oh yeah. Well, it's you're right. It improves,
Right.
so-called,
Right.
improves their
Right. It's so.
romantic sexual
Chastity in
life.
marriage is that valuing of the other person and bringing, because how everybody is like, keep the church out of my bedroom.
Yeah.
Is that's that big thing about abortion and contraception and everything like that. The church.
Anything sexual,
shouldn't-
just stay
right.
away. Yeah.
Church, stay out of my bedroom, whereas a chaste Catholic couple would say, no, my faith is in my
Right.
relationship with my spouse.
Right.
Even the sexual relationship, the church is in that.
Mhm.
We live that out.
Yeah, and even, you might say the bizarre sexual practices, all those kinds of things that are just a part of the world today. It's just totally incompatible to the dignity of Christian married life. See, pagan, living like a pagan, if you will. Maybe that would be. That's what they used to call it in the old days. Is paganism. And so you had a pagan marriage in some respect. Now, Jackie, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just gonna say, in the Rule of Life, in this book.
There you go. Yeah. If you go to that
It goes
chastity.
into detail about, under the chastity,
Mhm.
into detail about what that means.
Right. Yes.
Or brought up.
Which make sure you're continuing to read your rule of life. That's the key thing. We're not always going to cover it here. The rule of life is meant for you to continually read, so that in each of those sections that you're understanding, oh yeah, this is what it means. Okay.
Joyce, it's 86 and 87 is where
Right.
it
Yeah.
goes into detail on that.
Mhm. Right. So do you see what I'm talking about there? Not that we're, we tried to push that at one time, say, wait a minute, I think we are a new form of consecrated life, Didn't get anywhere in terms of, because we checked things out, even in Rome, about the ability for married people to make vows of chastity. And it's just, in Rome, the understanding is celibacy is required for vows in the consecrated life. It's pure and simple. So that hasn't changed. So anyway, I don't want to get off too much in that, but
There was a, I remember Pope John Paul made a statement at one point that lust has no place in marriage.
mhm.
And, the press thought that was hilarious, that what an idiot, but, people Reformed Catholics, yeah, of course, yeah, you don't look at your spouse as a thing to be used and exploited, that's what lust is. And
And it's not even sexual, it could be just simply things like treating the spouse like a slave,
Yeah.
you know? Or like you said, a thing, or could be even physical abuse, or, you know, whatever it is. I mean, so the whole element of chastity has to deal with the sanctity of the human person, the communion of persons, as Pope John Paul talked about.
Yeah, and in that section, it talks about how it's supposed to demonstrate the love of God for the church, or, you know, Jesus and the church.
The spousal
So it's
relationship of Christ and his
It's
church.
supposed to be a witness
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah. See, and that's, again, I think today people have a hard time because that spousal relationship is so screwed up just in society that, so when you say that, you know, well, father or sister or brother married the church, it was like, what? What? You know, meaning celibacy, you don't have an individual spouse on this earth, that your spouse is the church, you know, that you serve and live. That's a hard one for people to wrap their heads around when they're using that spousal relationship. But again, if I go back to marriage, there is a radical difference between a Christian couple that truly has a spousal relationship that is reflected by Christ in the church, you know, and a marked difference between that as opposed to all of the other arranged kind of relationships that we have today, you know. If you want to, let's go beyond that. We're talking about a man and a woman. We're limiting it to that, okay? Let's go beyond that to, you know, same-sex marriage as the so-called, and then some of all the other kinds of gender dysphoria kinds of things things can blend into. It's like, oh, okay. So that representation of a man and a woman in a sacramental marriage living, that spousal relationship as Christ to the church. That to me sounds like should be right up there with religious vows. I mean, that to me was terms of a witness. That to me is probably tougher today than never getting married and you know, living a celibate life and serving the church, you know. I see it as a lot less messy than what you guys have to struggle with. And then you got your children, then you got your grandchildren, okay, right? It gets messier and messier. So I know from having members who are in the situation. So it's a very tough thing, but this is really at the very heart of it. So it takes formation in that, of how to be able to live that out. And that's what our rule of life, that's what I'm saying, is that in that aspect, as Jackie was saying, the rule of life for the Holy Family Fraternity, for the married fraternity, is very challenging. Because it calls one to live it at the very heart of that life, of that consecrated life to Christ, and of living my marriage and living in forming our family life around the Holy Family. That's tough today. But that's what it means. And so you say, okay, Lord, I'm going to commit myself to that rule of life, and this is how we're going to live. Okay? Now here's the real tough part, and we've had situations like this. It's really nice when you have both husband and wife present. But what about, and you know, this is what we always have to help, is that if you have one of you, okay, that you're present, but your spouse is not present here, okay, hasn't made the same kind of commitments, all right? So, must that require, you wouldn't believe how much we had to go through this before, of making the decision. Like, well, we either have both, or then we're not going to admit the person into the Institute of St. Joseph. That did not seem right either. And so even though the spouse may not be a member of the Institute of St. Joseph, present there, that the person who is would do all that he or she possible to be able to live that way and to call that marriage. In other words, we talk about like leaven in the dough, that at least we have one. Now, if the other person, and we've had this a couple of times, where the spouse has not, not complied, but what would they? What's the word?
Cooperated?
Cooperated or given his or her blessing. In other words, saying, okay, I don't feel called to the Institute of St. Joseph, but with my spouse, they do. So we have to have that permission, so to speak, or that it's not going to be an antagonistic kind of thing. We don't want that to happen. Okay? I deal with this all the time with a permanent diaconate because that's married. And so the guy's going to get ordained. The guy's going to get ordained. And that changes the status, as you probably can notice, when all of a sudden a married man becomes part of the hierarchy of the church, which were normally just priests and bishops, we think about. And at the service of the church, that wife needs to embrace that, or it will cause trouble. And we've seen that. We've actually, and that's one way that I can tell that a married man who is going in the diaconate in terms of formation is by asking the wife, is this improving your marriage? And it's so wonderful to hear the wife say, he's a better man than I ever thought. That means the formation is working, because this is enhancing his married life and his family life. That's a sign, okay? So that's a similar thing that needs to happen there, where if we have one person who is living out and the other spouse is not an official member, but that in living out this rule of life, even singularly in a married situation, that it's bringing about good fruits. That's a sign of that. Not antagonism and not causing division. Okay? Last thing in the world we want to do is to diminish the sacrament of marriage by being an instrument of division into a union that is meant to be together. Okay? So, and that's not easy for those of you who have spouses who are not here, okay, that that yourself. And so that takes a bit of sometimes it takes years of being able to see how that's going to happen. Okay. So after the first profession, the initial formation of the member is complete. So the focus of continued formation is one of strengthening the spiritual discipline of the members to live perpetually their consecration. And that's really the heart and soul of it all, It's not just to live more and more, to have more and more and more formation, because it's formation, it's not just education. And that's sometimes people came because they wanted like a study group. Well, we're not a study group. Okay? This has to deal with living our Christian state in life deeper and deeper, and then committing ourselves to a particular way of life, how we do that according to our rule of life, perpetually, until death do us part. Okay? Not just, I'll belong to this group for a couple of years and I'll go belong to that group for a couple of years, and this kind of thing. No. It becomes part of like the vows that we make in my ordination, in marriage, in whatever. It gets blended into this way of living that we do permanently. So greater emphasis is given to formation within the fraternity to which they belong, since their state of life is the means by which they will carry out their apostolic mission. Okay? So your state in life, married, single, hermit, diocesan priest. Okay? So, final profession. When the period of temporary profession has been completed and members have been judged suitable, they are admitted to final incorporation, renewing their profession each year or honor their anniversary. And that's not necessarily done in a formal way in terms of, we do it all together, that you have to do it in front of the Institute. Kind of like as we do our renewal of our St. Joseph consecration and our Marian consecration, that we're to renew those too, because we don't just like, okay, bye Joseph, I'm going to Mary, and bye Mary, I'm going to Jesus. No, it's all together. So we never lose our St. Joseph consecration. Joseph leads us to Mary, who leads us to Jesus, and then the Holy Family. Okay. So it's a matter of during those times that we've done that, of just simply in our own prayer of just opening the book. That's why they're there, and renewing that consecration. We did it this year all together because it was the year of St. Joseph, and it was a wonderful way to be able to do that. Okay, a discernment period. Prior to the Marian consecration, this is what I was talking about before, a discernment period of up to 5 years may be granted to a member who is not yet certain of a stable form of life. If after 5 years no decision is freely made, the member is separated from the Institute of St. Joseph. Readmission later requires a probationary period to assess the person's intention and their readiness to enter a stable form of life. Okay? That is in there more principally for those who are not in the situation of single and married. Okay? One of our members read that and said, I'm going on my I'm called to marriage, but I'm going near my 5th year. Do I have to leave? See, I haven't found the person yet. Okay, so that's what I'm saying, is that you have, what that is, to use is either do it or get off the pot, as they used to say. You know what I mean? In other words, it's to help the person not just linger without making decisions. And if there's any problem today, especially with young people, really struggle with that, is like, I'm not sure I want to make a commitment to anything. You know what I mean? Just kind of live uncommitted. This is a real problem, especially for younger people. I think part of it is because there's so many options and but there's also a fear that, commitments don't always work out like we thought, and I'm not just talking about marriage, I'm talking about jobs, I'm talking about, whatever it might be, I'm just not going to commit myself to anything. That's a real problem, because you can't really live a Christian life unless you're committed. That's part of the issue. So one of the reasons people get drawn away from so many things is because they just simply can't commit themselves, in that way. So, okay? So that's what that is. So in terms of a readmission, sometimes that's done, I want to say behind the scenes, of just simply saying, okay, at least asking the person personally, in more of a spiritual direction kind of thing. Where are you at? Okay? You still want to be with us? Or, yes, I do, but these other things have to, have to match. Okay? And then, as we said, then separation of members from the Institute of St. Joseph. We don't go into the whole all the Code of Canon Law, but you see number 15 there. There's Canons 684 to 704 and 727 to 730, there's a number of canons in the Code of Canon Law that need to be followed to be able to do this. So, okay, any questions regarding any of that? Peggy?
I'm not sure I understood properly. If a person is divorced but has an annulment there, that's acceptable, but what if they did not want to get divorced and they don't want an annulment?
That's not the issue, okay? Because that's not an understanding of an annulment. Because, well, let me put it this way. If they are not remarrying, is that what you're talking about?
Right.
Okay, yeah, that might be a little different story,
Okay.
okay?
And then likewise, what about a widow or a widower?
Well, those, and we actually give an option for those who are widower or widower, okay? Which we have always done, because I'm gonna say, if you look at the Annunciation, I keep getting caught on this thing. If you look at the Annunciation fraternity, rule of life, it is very much directed to, I'm gonna live a celibate life as a single person living in the world. My work, my participation in the life of the church, in the life of society, and all of that, that's what I'm going to give to the Lord, okay? In marriage, it's pretty much directed toward family, okay? So, if a person is called after marriage, where they have fulfilled those promises, to look at the rule of life for the Annunciation fraternity, a single person living in the world, they may transfer to that fraternity, okay? It has a different focus. But most have just decided to remain in the Holy Family fraternity because their life, even though their spouse has passed, their life is still directed toward their family and their children and their grandchildren, etc. So it's just it's a different season in one's life as a Holy Family member, okay? So it's very rare that somebody might say that I really want to, enter into a member of the and Bob knows that from the years that he's been with us, that there have been some who have joined the Annunciation fraternity who had been married previously, and there are others, who have remained in the Holy Family fraternity. So that's where the flexibility, of sorting all that out, to really find at the heart of the person, how is it that you can best live this out? How God is calling you to live this out. That's the most important thing, in a very positive way. So, because I won't say the worst thing, but it's not about all of that. It's about living authentically in yourself the life you commit yourself to. So in other words, as the whole of the Institute of St. Joseph, it's not about living one kind of life. That's where you're talking about in terms like a religious life. As Owen was saying, well, I like the Benedictines. Okay? Notice how many kinds of Benedictines there are, okay? Which means that they haven't all agreed on how we're going to live this life. But the point being is that in a religious community, you give up in some ways yourself to the whole of the community. That's in terms of religious life. So I become a Benedictine, or a Trappist, or a Cistercian, or a Franciscan, or a Dominican, whatever it is. Because their charism has that charism of the founder and of the whole community that's been there throughout history. So I have to give myself, not just to Christ, but I give myself to that. We don't have that. That's one of the marks of distinction with the Institute of St. Joseph, is that we are an association of the faithful, okay? So we band together as an institute with a common constitution, common goal, but it's not to take away our own individuality and how God calls us. So that always has to be a determination of the individual, okay? Of the individual, and how that life can be lived out best. And I don't know if that makes sense to you, but you know, and so let's say, for example, of someone who is looking that we are, as an Institute of St. Joseph, all going to, I want to say, do the same thing and be the same thing and whatever. We're never going to be that. Okay? That's not what our goal and our purpose is. Our goal, our purpose, as we say, living that apostolic mission means that I have to give myself to the state in life that I've been called. Okay? So I'm a diocesan priest. Okay? So my whole identity is being, as best I can, the best diocesan priest I can be, the best pastor. Okay? And in terms of a married couple, of living that in marriage, or as a single person living in the world, when I'm at work, when I'm doing these kinds of things, that they see in me. Remember Father John talking about Adrian von Speyer, who was a single person living in the world, a doctor, right? And there was no doubt when they went to her as a doctor, they knew that they were not going to the necessarily ordinary doctor, okay? Because of the way she was living her consecrated life out. But she didn't have a whole bunch of other people doing that. It was Adrian living that out. So the individual. We are as authentic as we are the individual person. We cannot blame another person for not living our life. See what I mean by that? We make a consecration and we profess it to God ourselves. And we do that as a group. The Institute of St. Joseph is meant to help shape and form that, give some structure to it, but the consecration itself is very individual in that way, and it's lived out as authentically as I am authentic and you are authentic, you know, in the living of a Christian life. Does that make sense? Okay. It's a different kind of concept than religious life, than religious life, where not that you want to be a clone, but you know, except for the habit, you ought to be able to tell a Franciscan from a Dominican, from a Benedictine, from a Jesuit by the community that has been formed in them. Okay? And so it's that you give up that kind of more individuality. So does that help to understand that a little bit better? Any other questions you have? Okay, and then let's kind of move on to what I wanted to talk to you about in terms of the retreat. Okay, one of the things that has been on my heart and mind, maybe it's on yours, is I think we need to address that. Here, in terms of our own charism, here is kind of at the question that I think I would like to see if we can really focus on in the retreat. How it is when we talk about, especially the secular consecration particularly, but it doesn't eliminate the hermits because the hermit life, because even though it's lived in more of solitude, there's that solitude. It has to be open, as we say, to the world. But in a secular consecration, it's being leaven in the world. okay? Leaven in the world. What does that mean? To be leaven in the world. Okay? And I really think that we need to spend some time talking about that, because this is what's come to me. Let me just give you an example. I'd like to address some of the big issues that we're facing today, like this whole confusion about racism. Okay? And the cancel culture and what it means to be able to care for the poor. Being open to other cultures and those. What does that mean from a gospel perspective, an evangelical perspective? What's our responsibility? And to me, the real confusion is that our tendency is two. One is, and I said this to your mother before you said you're going to form I called it Owen's Fugamundi Society, which means Fugamundi is Benedict's word, I'm fleeing the world. Fugamundi. So, that's a charge. Fugamundi, okay? We can do that. We can leave the world, but as I said, even with Benedict had a purpose of how to influence the world by fleeing the world, by forming a monastery, forming a city within a city that was geared toward the gospel. And it became a shining light. That's one of the reasons why Pope Benedict XVI, he took the name Benedict, is because he was always drawn to that charism of what Benedict, he was the patron of Europe, right? The whole of Europe. St. Benedict is the patron of Europe because of the tremendous amount of monasteries that came from his movement to the monastic life, of forming monasteries just outside many times big cities. And when you had the corruption in the city, and then you had the monks or the nuns who were singing their chant every morning and having mass, and they had their gardens, and they learned how to make the best liquor, they learned how to make the best candy, really, they became artisans of life in the monastery. That's why. So you saw that. What they did for the glory of God. And so, Dom Perignon, the famous champagne, is named after Father Perignon, who discovered bubbles. We can make wine with bubbles, called champagne, So they would experiment with all these kinds of things. So it wasn't like praying in your cell all day. They became artisans in life. And then when people were so sick of that dull life outside and of seeing no real, we're getting nowhere, they'd say, I think I'm going to join the monastery. It's far more exciting than out here. And they became the best musicians, and it was just amazing. And it was an artisan community because it was built upon giving God the glory in everything that you do. Okay, so that was Benedict's Fugamundi. Okay, so if that's what you want to do, I'm all for it, because that will change the world. But this is what I'm saying: is I don't think we understand that. Is that we don't have and unfortunately, even within monastic life and all that kind of thing, is so disappeared off the radar. And and I'm not talking about just monasteries, but I'm talking about that ideal of living the Christian life as a comparable life. It's kind of like shining light on the dump. It was like, the light was coming out from the monastery, and it was shining light on the garbage. See? It was a radical comparison. And that's what I'm really saying, is because that to me is at the very heart of how we should be living, not in a Fugamundi, out in a monastery, but in the world. Is my married life shining so brightly to give, people are saying, what's different about you? Where's your happiness come from? Where is your joy in all of this kind of thing? Oh, my sacramental marriage and my consecration to God. Oh, maybe I'd like to do that. I'm drawn to it. So this is what I mean. Being leaven in the world means not just being one more complainer and one more, all of that, but it means a radical alternative to the garbage in the world. That's what it means to be a leaven in the world. Okay? So if we who are consecrating our lives are just simply repeating the same kind of thing. So the tendency then is and this is where it really has kind of drawn me to in the retreat of really reflecting upon that. And I don't want to do it just as myself doing it. That's why I'm going to express this to our priests on Monday when we have our priest fraternity meeting in La Crosse. Because what I'd like to do is maybe throw that out as an idea, and then maybe have 2 or 3 of us as priests maybe focus our attention on certain things. Because one of the things I wanted to talk about or really express is to look at that in terms of the effect of Benedict and many of the monastic movement, and what it did to society. That's part of it. But there are others I know within our own priests who could take that cultural kind of thing and then put it into context to really help us understand how it is that we need to fight this tendency. Because the other thing that happens is we try to fight the ideology of the day, right? Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, you just hear it ad nauseum. And one of those ideologies is the less dirty that we can live. And this is the thing that occurred to me in terms of racism. It was like, all right, let's just start from a biblical point of view. What is the radical reality of baptism in the scriptures and in the church? When the apostles not only were called to baptism themselves, but they were sent, to go out and baptize to all the nations. What does it mean? To blacks, to whites, to Asians? No. Go out to all the world. By the fact that they were baptized, they had to give up that mentality that there was any distinction of race. There was only one, the human race. And it was the human race that Jesus himself has come to save. So how did that live out in reality? Okay. Well, you had, first of all, the confrontation. You just think about this. How hard was it for that Christian community to go from Jewish to Gentile to both? Right? I mean, that was a huge thing. Because in the Old Testament, we know that this is the chosen people of God. To invite Gentiles into that? What? And there was huge controversy. Peter himself had to get a very upset stomach, if you read the Acts of the Apostles, to accept the Gentiles. But it was obvious of Jesus when he broke the barrier between sexes, in being able to speak to and to treat women so much differently than any male Jew did, and sometimes being caused by that. To the Samaritan woman, who was of another, you look at Jesus and it was the barrier, it was the fact that all of these human barriers that have been put up, all these divisions, that it is Jesus himself alone at first who is the one to be able to tear those down. Because his message of salvation was not just to some, but it was to all. That's the central Christian message, right? So therefore, by the very fact that we have been baptized, and anybody who has seen it or had the beauty of experiencing it, I always say this, you know, if you have a chance to go to Rome and to have a mass, you know, out in St. Peter's Square with people of every, you know, race and culture attending the Mass, it's just awesome. It's just awesome, okay? Why? Because there's no distinction that we make every day. There's just no distinction of that. Even in our churches, even though despite the fact that, you know, how difficult it is sometimes, especially those of you who live in certain areas where you might have an Hispanic ministry in a Anglo parish, the friction that is there. You know, and those are the things that confront us. You know, it's like, well, wait a minute here. You know, Germans founded this parish. What the heck are the Hispanics doing here? That is so un-Christian. See what I mean? That is so in that way. Okay. So when we get into that kind of mentality, we are just simply falling back to kind of like the scribes and the Pharisee kind of thing that, you know, that they were always bringing up in terms of Jesus. So that's what I'm talking about, is that radical call to live our baptismal call as leaven in the world, facing these kinds of things that we're, you know, that we're confronting today. And very simply, why is the world becoming more divisive, more separated, more divided? It's a very simple reason. Because we are becoming less and less and less Christian. Okay. And okay, that to me is the answer to what the problem. People call themselves Christian, you know, but people can call themselves whatever they want to be. But it's the reality of the fact of how it is that we live. Okay? So I don't know where to exactly go with, but that's the kind of thing that I really find that needs some prayer and it needs some thought in a retreat of how it is that, because it's only going to get worse. I'm not, it's only going to get worse, this kind of division and conflict. We don't know where this is all going to lead. We might even say, how is it that we live as slaves? What do we mean by that? We got rid of slavery. Oh, really? How's the pandemic going for you? How free do you feel? Okay. Well, you know what's happened, how all of a sudden powers can start taking over. Okay. However, St. Paul, he wrote about Onesimus, the slave, and how it was giving instruction of, even if you're in slavery, even if you are a slave, and that's where you are because of the society and the culture in life, it doesn't mean you can't be a Christian, right? Doesn't mean you can't be a Christian. So that's the radical nature of the Christian life, is not just fixing everything and making everything heaven. It's a matter of being able to live in the world in which we live as a Christian, of being that leaven in the world, to embrace the suffering, to embrace what may come, but with faith in Jesus Christ. That's kind of the general painting of the canvas so far. Any comments from you? I don't know if that sounds
good.
It's like our motto, make God present to the world and the world present to God.
And that, yes, right. Deus adsit mundo et mundusque Deo. That's our Forum Mundi. Deus adsit, right? Deus ad, yes.
Sounds like you're talking about manipulating the world with beauty.
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing too, is that, you know, we've been talking about Adrian von Speyer and Hans-Urs von Balthasar. And that's always, in people who've known me that long, and Father John Mary, Father von Balthasar is just like to me, one of the most astounding theologians, because, yeah, we have the four categories of God is one, true, and good. And a lot of our theology has been shaped around that, you know, in terms of intellectually and having the right, you know, theology and all that kind of thing. But the one aspect of it has been lost is kind of that Benedictine sense, and that what Benedict imagined is the theology of beauty. Okay, called it ascetical, not ascetical, but aesthetical theology. Father von Balthasar he used the principle of beauty as being the purest expression. True beauty is the purest expression of God. Okay? When something is truly beautiful, it ceases all words. It enters into mystery. It enters into mystery. So when you truly hear beautiful music, see beautiful art, okay, and you will notice this. You go have somebody, and I always love to see. I always love this as a pastor, because of different churches or whatever. And my tendency, of course, was always to, I think, make churches more beautiful. Okay, not this. Of course, I went to the seminary in one of the starkest places in the world, St. John's Collegeville, where we were literally told that the reason why this is so plain is because the people are beautiful.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So when you come, you add the beauty. It's like, that's pretty presumptuous. Okay? Instead of the beautiful works of art. And then you'd find young people who wanted to get married in a church, and there were such people back in the day, that they would walk in from some of these churches and they go, I think I want to get married here. Why? It just, all of that just innately lifted you up. Raised your mind and heart to God. Okay, that's what beauty does. Okay? So that's exactly the point. That is also what the Christian life should be. That's when Father von Balthasar is saying, our life must be beautiful. We must seek the things that are beautiful. So even in our Constitution, when we talk about poverty, poverty is meant not just to be not having things. Poverty is meant to be choosing what things you have. In other words, does this have value? I don't mean just because it costs a lot. But what's the inherent value of the things that I own and possess? Okay? What's the value? What transcendent value do they have? Is it just, I think I will buy another row of storage units to keep all my crap in.
Yeah.
Okay? You ever see how many are being built? Okay? I call them King Tut's tombs. They're just like, okay. And I will tell you the truth. I actually know a guy who built a bunch of these. He said, you would not believe how they're having trouble. People die. And nobody knows that their stuff is there. So eventually, after a period of time, they actually can, you've probably seen this on some television. I think there's a television show where they open them up, and they do auctions, I mean, they discover some incredible things. But people just stuff things in storage units because it's stuff. Okay? So that's the point. So it's not a matter of that. So if I'm going to go to a show, I want to make sure that it's beautiful. That if there's some inherent value to it, or own a piece of art, or or a statue, or, you know, an icon, or whatever it might be, that is not just, oh, what's the cheapest thing in the catalog, okay? I mean, that's one way to do it, to live poverty, you know, but not you do that, but, you know, is it better to have one beautiful thing than 20 of the same thing that is just, you know, doesn't mean anything? See, that's a whole different way of thinking. That's a whole different way of thinking. And so again, you know, that's another aspect of things that we, you know, can talk about in the, you know, area of how that is that we witness that in poverty, for example, or within our own life, of that beauty of being able to accentuate the light of beauty in our world that tends to be quite dark and unattractive, so to speak. That other aspect. Anybody else? Good point, Peg.
Could you give me the dates?
Oh, the dates? I don't.
It's the second full week of June, 12th and 13th.
Yeah, no, it is, because my birthday's the 11th, so it's always from my birthday.
Yeah.
So I don't plan it that way, but it's just, that's a word. So whatever that Monday, Tuesday is, around those dates there, whatever, however they fall, I don't remember. But, because our priests come the night before, so we have kind of our fraternity gathering on Sunday night, and then they're here from Monday, and then usually through Tuesday then, so.
Good.
What's that? Got it? So it would be, oh, that's this year?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, well, the 11th is a Friday.
No, June.
Huh?
Well, then it's maybe the 14th, 15th, that might be right. 14th, 15th.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's when it
13th
is.
through the 15th.
What's that?
I've got written down 13th through the 15th, so it's
Okay,
Okay, that would be
Right.
Sunday night.
yeah. Yeah, it'd be the 14th and the 15th
yeah,
when
you
we start
must
in the morning.
put down the
Sunday.
13th because your priest gave
Because
you
of the
that.
priests, yeah, right, yeah, so, okay. All right, very good. Owen, you can, my tech